I never thought I'd be the one to discover my mom was dying. Not like that, anyway. Not by accidentally walking in on my parents having what they thought was a private conversation in our kitchen at midnight. My name is Ella, and until that night 3 months ago, I was just your average 17-year-old whose biggest worry was whether I'd get into the archaeology program at University of Chicago. Now? Well, now everything's different. I remember exactly how the linoleum felt under my bare feet as I crept downstairs for a glass of water. The house was dark except for the soft glow coming from the kitchen. I heard my dad's voice first, low and strained in a way I'd never heard before. "We have to tell her, Sarah. The treatments aren't working anymore." "Not yet," my mom whispered back. "Please, Mark. She has her college applications to focus on. Her whole future ahead of her." I froze on the last step, my hand gripping the banister so tight my knuckles turned white. "Sarah, she's going to notice something's wrong eventually. The doctor said 3 months, maybe 4. Stop." Mom's voice cracked. "Just stop." I must have made some sort of sound because they both went quiet. Then Mom's chair scraped against the floor, and I panicked, practically running back upstairs. I shut my bedroom door as quietly as I could and slid down against it, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The next morning, I watched Mom make breakfast like nothing was wrong. She hummed while flipping pancakes, her favorite apron tied around her waist. But now I noticed things I hadn't before. How loose the apron had become, the slight tremor in her hands as she poured coffee, the way she leaned against the counter when she thought no one was looking. "Everything okay, sweetie?" she asked, catching me staring. "You've barely touched your breakfast." I forced a smile. "Yeah, just nervous about that history test today." Dad looked up from his newspaper, and for a second our eyes met. There was something there, guilt maybe, or fear. He quickly looked away. "Well, you've always been great at history," Mom said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "It's in your blood. Your grandfather was an amazing historian, you know." "I know, Mom. You've told me about 1,000,000 times." I tried to keep my voice light, but my throat felt tight. Later that day, I sat in the school library during lunch, trying to focus on my archaeology textbook, but instead finding myself looking up cancer symptoms on my phone. Mrs. Green, the librarian, must have noticed something was off because she brought me a cup of tea without saying a word. My best friend Maya dropped into the chair across from me. "Okay, Spill. You've been weird all day." I closed my phone quickly. "It's nothing." "Bull," she said, but didn't push further. That's what I love about Maya. She knows when to back off. The rest of the day passed in a blur. When I got home, Mom was asleep on the couch, a blanket pulled up to her chin. I stood there watching her breathe, counting the rises and falls of her chest. She looked so small suddenly, so fragile. Dad came up behind me, putting his hand on my shoulder. "Let her rest," he said softly. I turned to look at him, and the words were right there on the tip of my tongue. But something in his expression stopped me. He looked lost, scared even. In that moment, I realized that maybe he needed to pretend everything was okay just as much as Mom did. So I nodded and went upstairs to my room, where I pulled out my college applications. The University of Chicago's deadline was coming up, and Mom was right. I had my whole future ahead of me. I just didn't know how much of that future would include her. Changes in Mom happened so fast after that night. Felt like watching a time-lapse video where everything speeds up except you're stuck moving at normal speed. 2 weeks after I overheard their conversation, she couldn't even make it up the stairs without Dad's help. I was sitting at the kitchen table, pretending to study while actually watching them through the doorway. Mom's hand gripped the railing, her knuckles white, while Dad hovered behind her like he was afraid she'd shatter if he touched her wrong. "I can manage, Mark," she said, but her voice wavered. That's when Grandma Evelyn showed up unannounced, taking one look at the situation and immediately taking charge. "Sarah, honey, why don't we set you up in the downstairs guest room?" Mom started to protest, but Grandma just raised her eyebrow in that way she has. and suddenly we were all moving furniture and bringing down Mom's things. Dad disappeared into his home office halfway through, claiming he had an important work call. Your father's always been better at running than facing things head-on, Grandma said later as we folded Mom's clothes into the guest room dresser. Even as a boy, I wanted to defend him, but I couldn't find the words. Instead, I held up one of Mom's favorite sweaters, the soft blue one she always wore to my school events. It hung loose from my hands like it was already empty. Have you told Maya? Grandma asked, watching me carefully. I shook my head. Nobody knows. Well, except Mrs. Green, I think. She keeps finding excuses to check on me in the library. Sometimes the people who say the least understand the most. Grandma squeezed my shoulder. Speaking of understanding, when was the last time you worked on those college applications? I can't think about that right now. Yes, you can and you will. Her voice was gentle but firm. Your mother would want. Don't. I pulled away. Please don't tell me what Mom would want. Later that evening, I found Dad in his office, staring at his computer screen without really seeing it. Empty coffee cups littered his desk, and his tie hung loose around his neck. Dad! I waited for him to look at me. The hospital called. They moved Mom's appointment to tomorrow morning. He rubbed his eyes. I have a meeting I can't reschedule. But you promised. I know what I promised, Ella. His voice had an edge I'd never heard before. But someone has to keep working to pay for all of this. I felt something snap inside me. Right, because that's what matters right now. Work. Don't take that tone with me. What tone should I take? The words burst out before I could stop them. The one where I pretend everything's fine? Where we all just watch Mom get worse while you hide in here with your precious meetings? His chair scraped back as he stood. That's enough. You're right, it is enough. I turned to leave but paused at the door. I'll take Mom to her appointment. At least one of us should be there. I slammed the door harder than necessary and nearly ran into Maya, who was just coming up the front walk as I stormed outside. Whoa, she said, catching my arm. Where's the fire? I opened my mouth to give my usual everything's fine response, but what came out instead was a sob. Maya didn't say anything, just pulled me into a hug right there on the front porch. It's my mom, I finally managed to say. She's dying. Saying it out loud made it real in a way it hadn't been before. Maya held me tighter as I told her everything. The conversation I'd overheard, Dad's retreat into work, the way Mom tried to pretend she wasn't in pain. Why didn't you tell me sooner? She asked when I finished. Because then it would be true, I whispered. We sat on the porch steps until the sun started to set. Through the window, I could see Grandma helping Mom into bed, Dad's office door still firmly closed. The distance between us all seemed to grow wider with each passing day, like we were planets slowly drifting apart in our own separate orbits of grief. I didn't know it then, but this was just the beginning of how everything would fall apart. Mom died on a Tuesday. By Friday, Dad was already talking about moving forward and getting back to normal. 2 months later, he introduced us to Vivian. I was in the kitchen making tea when they walked in, Dad's hand resting on the small of her back like it used to rest on Mom's. The woman was tall, elegant, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ella, this is Vivian, Dad said, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness that made my stomach turn. We've been seeing each other at grief counseling. I nearly dropped the mug I was holding. Grief counseling. The sessions he'd started attending instead of visiting Mom in the hospital during her final weeks. It's so wonderful to finally meet you, Vivian said, stepping forward with outstretched arms. Your father talks about you constantly. I stepped back, avoiding the hug. Does he? That's news to me. Dad's face tightened. Yeah. I have homework, I said, grabbing my tea and heading for the stairs. As I left, I heard Vivian's soft voice. Give her time, Mark. This must be so hard for her. The way she said it made my skin crawl. Over the next few weeks, Vivian became a constant presence in our house. She rearranged the furniture, replaced Mom's old curtains with modern blinds, and slowly began moving her things into Dad's room, into Mom's room. One afternoon, I came home to find her going through Mom's closet. "Oh, Ella!" She jumped slightly, holding one of Mom's sweaters. "I was just organizing things. Your father thought it might be time to donate some of these." "Did he?" My voice came out flat. "Funny, he hasn't mentioned anything to me about it." "Well, you know how men are." She laughed lightly. "They avoid these difficult conversations. But it's been 3 months, sweetie. We need to start fresh. We, like she was already part of the family." I grabbed the sweater from her hands. "These aren't yours to give away." "Ella," she said, her tone shifting to something harder. "I know this is difficult, but your father and I are trying to build something here. But we need your support, not your teenage attitude." Before I could respond, Dad appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay in here?" "Of course, darling," Vivian said, her voice honey-sweet again. "Ella and I were just having a little chat about moving forward. That night I called Grandma Evelyn in tears. She's going through Mom's things," I whispered into the phone, hiding in my bedroom. "Dad's letting her change everything, like Mom was never even here." "Oh, sweetheart." Grandma's voice was tight with anger. "Have you talked to your father about how this makes you feel?" "He doesn't listen anymore. It's like," I swallowed hard, "it's like he's becoming a different person around her." The next morning I found Mom's jewelry box missing from her dresser. When I confronted Vivian, she blinked innocently. "Mark gave those to me," she said. "He thought I should have them since we're getting married." The world tilted sideways. "What? Oh!" She covered her mouth with perfectly manicured fingers. "Was that supposed to be a surprise?" "I'm so sorry, I thought he'd told you." I ran to the bathroom and threw up, my hand shaking as I gripped the toilet bowl. Through the wall I could hear Vivian's voice. "Mark, she's upset. Maybe we should have waited to tell her." That afternoon I sat in the school library, staring blankly at my archaeology textbook while Mrs. Green watched me with concern. Maya sat beside me, her hand on my arm. "There's something off about her," I said. "The way she acts when Dad's not around, the things she says." "Document everything," Maya said firmly. "Times, dates, what she does. If something's really wrong, you'll need proof." I nodded, pulling out my phone to start a notes file. As I typed, I remembered something Mom used to say about archaeology. Sometimes the truth lies in the smallest details, the things most people overlook. I glanced up to see Vivian's car pulling into the school parking lot. She wasn't supposed to pick me up today. Dad was. Something cold settled in my stomach as I watched her step out of the car, that perfect smile fixed on her face as she walked toward the building. The game was just beginning, and I had a feeling the rules were about to change. The first time Vivian hit me, I almost convinced myself it was an accident. We were in the kitchen, arguing about the box of Mom's old recipes I'd found in the trash. Her hand flew out, quick as a snake, catching my cheek. The shock hurt more than the slap. "Oh, sweetie." Her eyes went wide with practiced concern. "You shouldn't have gotten in my personal space like that. Look what you made me do." I touched my stinging cheek, watching her carefully. "I'll tell Dad." She smiled, and something cold slithered down my spine. "Tell him what?" "That you got aggressive while I was trying to clean? That you've been hostile since day one?" She sighed dramatically. "Poor Mark, he's so worried about your emotional state lately." I've been documenting everything like Maya suggested, but this was different. This was war. The next morning, Dad was already gone when I came down for breakfast. Vivian sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone while sipping coffee from Mom's favorite mug. "Your father's concerned about your grades," she said without looking up. "He thinks maybe you should focus on something more practical than archaeology." I agree. My hands clenched around my backpack straps. "Really?" because last week he said he was proud of my college applications. Things change. She finally looked at me, her eyes hard despite her sweet smile. Family dynamics change. You understand, don't you? School, I hid in the library during lunch, my hand shaking as I added to my notes file. Mrs. Green appeared with a cup of tea like she always did these days. "Everything all right, Ella?" she asked, her eyes lingering on my cheek where concealer covered the faint bruise. "Fine," I said automatically, then hesitated. "Actually, do you know anything about documenting abuse?" Her expression shifted subtly. "I might have some resources that could help. Hypothetically speaking, of course." That afternoon, Maya and I sat in her bedroom going through my phone's photo gallery. Pictures of Mom's missing things, screenshots of texts from Vivian, dates and times of accidents. "This is seriously messed up," Maya said, scrolling through the evidence. "Have you shown your dad? He wouldn't believe me. You should see how he looks at her like she's some kind of savior." I hugged my knees to my chest. "Besides, she's already got him thinking I'm unstable." "What about your grandmother?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. "Coming to pick you up. We need to talk about your attitude." My stomach lurched. "I have to go." "Wait." Maya grabbed my arm. "Stay here tonight. My mom won't mind. If I don't go home, it'll just be worse later." Car ride was silent. When we got home, Dad's car was in the driveway, unexpected and terrifying. Inside, he sat at the kitchen table with papers spread out in front of him. "Ella," he said, his voice tight. "Care to explain these?" My heart stopped. On the table were printouts of my college applications, the ones I'd secretly submitted to archaeology programs. "I found them while organizing your room," Vivian said sweetly. "I was so concerned about you going behind your father's back." "You went through my room?" I turned to Dad. "She went through my things." "Don't change the subject," he snapped. "We agreed you'd apply to business schools." This is exactly the kind of reactive behavior Vivian's been telling me about. The betrayal felt like a physical blow. I looked between them, Dad's disappointed face, Vivian's perfectly crafted concern, and something inside me broke. "Mom would have supported me," I said quietly. Dad flinched. Vivian's mask slipped for just a second, showing the anger underneath. "Go to your room," Dad said. "We'll discuss this when you're ready to be reasonable." I ran upstairs, locking my door before pulling out my phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled through my contacts, stopping at Grandma Evelyn's number. A new text from Maya popped up. "Did you get home okay?" Another from Mrs. Green. "Those resources are in your locker whenever you need them." I took a deep breath and pressed call on Grandma's number. As it rang, I could hear Vivian's voice drifting up from downstairs, soft and reasonable, spinning her web around my father. "Grandma," my voice cracked. "I need help." Pregnancy announcement came during dinner, like a bomb dropped between the mashed potatoes and green beans. Dad beamed while Vivian touched her stomach with theatrical tenderness. I focused on my plate, pushing food around while they discussed nursery colors and baby names. "You'll have a little brother or sister," Vivian said, reaching for my hand across the table. "Won't that be wonderful?" I pulled away, my fork clattering against my plate. "I have to study." That night, I called Grandma Evelyn again. "They're having a baby." "Oh, sweetheart." Her voice was tight with concern. "Are you safe there?" "I don't know anymore." The next few weeks were a blur of morning sickness, Vivian's, not mine, and Dad running around like an excited puppy. She played it perfectly, acting weak and vulnerable while shooting me knowing looks when he wasn't watching. Then came the stairs incident. I was heading down to the kitchen when I heard them arguing. Vivian's voice drifted up, trembling with tears. "I just don't understand why she hates me so much, Mark. I'm trying so hard." I froze on the landing, listening. "She's still grieving," Dad said. "We all are. But the way she looks at me, the things she says when you're not around." I'm worried about the baby, Mark. This kind of stress isn't good for us. I started to turn back, but the stair creaked. They both looked up. Were you spying on us? Vivian's face transformed, tears vanishing. I was just. She rushed up the stairs, faster than any pregnant woman should move. As she passed me, her shoulder knocked into mine hard. I stumbled, catching myself on the railing. Ella, she screamed, grabbing her stomach. What are you doing? Dad appeared at the bottom of the stairs. What happened? She pushed me. Vivian was crying again, those instant tears. I was just trying to talk to her, and she pushed me. I didn't, but Dad's face had already hardened. Go to your room, he said. Now. 3 days later, Vivian lost the baby. The doctors called it a miscarriage, but she had a different story. It was the stress, she told Dad while I listened from the hallway. The constant tension, the way she's been acting. I tried to protect our baby, Mark, but she just wouldn't stop. That night, I found all of Mom's remaining photos removed from the walls. When I confronted Dad, he exploded. Enough, he shouted. Vivian needs peace right now. She needs to heal. Why can't you understand that? Mom needed peace too, I shot back. She needed you, but you were too busy with work. And now you're too busy with her to see what she really is. His hand twitched, and for a second I thought he might hit me. Instead, he just looked disappointed. Somehow that was worse. You're grounded, he said quietly. No phone, no computer except for schoolwork. And you'll apologize to Vivian. I ran to my room, slamming the door. My phone buzzed one last time before Dad could confiscate it. A text from Maya. Mrs. Green found something. You need to see this. The next morning, I pretended to leave for school but doubled back through the kitchen door. I needed evidence, something concrete to show Dad what Vivian really was. I found her in Mom's old studio, going through a box of family photos. She looked up, unsurprised. I wondered when you'd try something like this, she said calmly. You're so predictable, Ella. Just like your mother was. My blood ran cold. What do you mean? She smiled, pulling out a photo I'd never seen before. Mom, years younger, standing with Vivian? Your mother and I have more history than you know, she said. And now I'm going to finish what I started back then. The photo slipped from my trembling fingers as everything suddenly clicked into place. This wasn't just about Dad or the baby. This was about Mom. And I was next. I ran all the way to school that morning, my lungs burning and the photograph crumpled in my pocket. Mrs. Green was waiting in the library with Maya, both of their faces grim. Show her, Maya said. Mrs. Green slid a yellowed newspaper clipping across the table. The headline made my stomach lurch. Local woman found dead after house fire. Husband's girlfriend primary suspect. That's Vivian, I whispered, staring at the grainy photo. Different name, but it's her. Charges were dropped, Mrs. Green said quietly. Insufficient evidence. The husband refused to testify. My hands shook as I pulled out the photograph from home. She knew my mom. Before everything. Maya grabbed my arm. Ella, your neck. I touched the spot where Vivian's nails had dug in during our confrontation, feeling the raised welts. It doesn't matter. We have to show this to Dad. We need to call the police, Mrs. Green insisted. They won't believe me. They'll just. The library door opened. Vivian stood there, perfectly composed in her designer outfit, Dad right behind her. There you are, she said sweetly. We've been so worried. Dad looked exhausted, his tie askew. Ella, come home. We need to talk about your behavior. Mark, Mrs. Green stepped forward. There's something you need to see. I know about the accusations, he cut her off. Vivian told me everything. How you've been encouraging Ella's paranoid behavior, feeding into her grief. My world tilted sideways. Dad, no. It's time to go, Vivian said, her hand closing around my arm. Her nails dug into the same spots as before, making me wince. Mrs. Green moved to intervene, but Dad blocked her path. "This is a family matter." "Mark," Mrs. Green tried again. "Look at your daughter. Really look at her." But he was already steering me toward the door, Vivian's grip never loosening. Maya called after me, but her voice was drowned out by the ringing in my ears. Car ride home was silent. When we arrived, Vivian went straight upstairs while Dad led me to the kitchen. "I found these in your room," he said, dropping a stack of papers on the table. My documentation, my photos, everything I'd collected. Vivian's right. This obsession isn't healthy. "Dad, please. We're sending you to a treatment facility," he said. "Just for a few weeks. To help you process your grief." The world stopped. "What?" "It's already arranged. You leave tomorrow morning." "You can't." "I can," he snapped. "I'm your father. This is for your own good." I ran upstairs, slamming my door and grabbing my phone to call Grandma Evelyn. No signal. The Wi-Fi was down too. Vivian appeared in my doorway. "Looking for this?" She held up the router cable. "We thought it best to limit your access. Wouldn't want you spreading more lies." "They're not lies," I said, my voice breaking. "You knew Mom. That photo." "Oh, that." She smiled. "Sarah always was too trusting. Just like you." "What did you do to her?" "Nothing she didn't bring on herself." Vivian stepped closer. "Sometimes people just get sick, Ella. Sometimes accidents just happen." The implications hit me like a physical blow. You made her sick?" "Prove it," she whispered, then turned and walked away, leaving my door open. I could hear Dad downstairs, making calls about the treatment facility. Through my window, I saw Mrs. Green's car pull up, then Grandma Evelyn's. Dad met them in the driveway, arguing. My phone was useless. My evidence was gone. Tomorrow I'd be locked away where no one would believe me. I looked at my bedroom window, then at the tree outside. 3 stories up, but the branches were strong. The mom used to joke about how she'd caught me climbing it to sneak out when I was younger. Mom, who might not have died from natural causes after all. I grabbed my backpack and opened the window. Sometimes running away isn't cowardice, sometimes it's survival. Behind me, I heard Vivian's footsteps coming back up the stairs. It was now or never. Grandma Evelyn's attic became my darkroom, where I developed the photos from Mom's old camera I'd grabbed during my escape. Most were blank or ruined, but one stopped my heart. Vivian in our kitchen months before Mom got sick, barely visible in the background of a family dinner photo. "Found something?" Maya asked from the doorway. I handed her the photo. 3 weeks had passed since I'd climbed down that tree, since Grandma and Mrs. Green had helped me disappear. Dad's calls had gone from angry to pleading to silence. "Look at what she's holding," I said, pointing to Vivian's hand. A small bottle, half hidden behind her back. Maya's eyes widened. "Is that—" "I found more," I said, spreading out other photos on the table. Different names, different cities. Always the same pattern. She gets close to grieving men with teenage daughters. Then accidents happen. We have to show the police. Not yet. I pulled out my phone, showing her the text I'd received that morning. "Missing your mother's things? Come alone to the house at midnight. Tell anyone and they disappear forever. Ella no." She has Mom's journal. Her real jewelry, not the fake she claimed Dad gave her. I took a shaky breath. "And maybe proof of what she did." Maya grabbed my arm. "This is crazy. She's dangerous. So am I." That night, I slipped into my old house through the kitchen door, still broken from when Dad kicked it last summer. The house was dark except for Mom's studio upstairs. Vivian stood at Mom's old desk, looking through a leather-bound book. Mom's journal. "I wondered if you'd come," she said without turning around. "You're so like her." Same weakness for sentiment. Why did you do it? She laughed softly. Do you know what it's like, watching other women live the life you deserve? Sarah had everything. The devoted husband, the perfect daughter, the beautiful home. Her voice hardened. She didn't deserve it. So you poisoned her. Prove it. She finally turned. Oh, wait, you can't. The evidence is all gone, just like it was with the others. Your father won't believe you. No one will. That's where you're wrong. I pulled out my phone, recording light blinking. Say it again. Tell me how you killed my mother. Her face twisted. She lunged for the phone, but I was ready. We grappled, crashing into Mom's photography equipment. A flash went off, momentarily blinding us both. You stupid girl, she snarled, fingers clawing for my throat. I'll make it look like suicide. Just like I planned before you ran. The studio door burst open. Dad stood there, face ashen, his phone also recording. Behind him, Mrs. Green and 2 police officers. Mark, Vivian's voice instantly transformed, becoming soft and frightened. She attacked me. I heard everything, he said, his voice breaking. I heard what you did to Sarah. She lunged for the window, but the officers were faster. As they led her away, she locked eyes with me one last time. You're just like her, she spat. Weak. No, I said quietly. I'm the one who stopped you. Later, sitting on the porch with Dad, I finally asked the question that had been burning inside me. How did you know to come? Your grandmother, he said, looking older than I'd ever seen him. She showed me the photos you found. Made me really look at them. He turned to me, eyes wet. I'm so sorry, Ella. I should have seen it. Should have protected you both. I thought about Mom, about justice and revenge, about the fine line between them. We can't change what happened, I said finally. But we can choose what happens next. He nodded, understanding. Inside, I could hear Maya and Mrs. Green going through Mom's recovered belongings. Life wouldn't magically fix itself, but for the first time since Mom died, I felt like I could breathe again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying your enemy, it's about refusing to let them destroy you. 6 months after Vivian's arrest, I stood in Mom's old studio, now converted into my darkroom. The acceptance letter from the University of Chicago's archaeology program lay on the desk beside a stack of photographs, evidence from Vivian's trial, pictures of Mom, memories both painful and precious. Ready? Dad asked from the doorway. I nodded, carefully packing the last of Mom's cameras. The house was sold, we were both moving on. Dad to a smaller place closer to his new therapy practice, me to Grandma Evelyn's until college started. Found this while packing, he said, holding out a worn book. It was your mother's. The journal. The one Vivian had been reading that night. My hands trembled as I opened it, a sealed envelope falling from between its pages. My name written in Mom's handwriting. I'll give you a minute, Dad said quietly, stepping out. I sat in Mom's old chair, unfolding the letter. My dearest Ella, if you're reading this, then my suspicions about Vivian were right. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you from what was coming, but I knew you would be strong enough to face it. You always were the brave one. I recognized her the moment she started volunteering at the hospital, the woman who destroyed my college roommate's family years ago. By then it was too late. The doctors couldn't explain why I was getting sicker so quickly. But you, my brilliant girl, you figured it out. Just like you'll figure out your own path in life. Don't let anyone tell you archaeology is just digging up the past. It's about uncovering truth, preserving stories that need to be told. Your story needs to be told. All my love. Mom. Maya found me there later, still holding the letter. Mrs. Green's here, she said. The police want to talk to you about another case. Apparently, your evidence helped them reopen some old investigations. I thought about Vivian's words that night, just like the others. How many families had she destroyed? How many stories needed to be uncovered? In the kitchen, Mrs. Green was showing Dad a newspaper article about Vivian's previous victims. "Their daughters want to meet you," she told me. "When you're ready." "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself. Later, standing in the driveway with the last boxes packed, I watched Dad struggling to lock the front door. Key stuck, it always had. "Here," I said, showing him the trick Mom had taught me. "You have to lift and turn at the same time." He smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "When did you get so wise?" "I had good teachers." Grandma Evelyn pulled up in her car, Maya riding shotgun. They'd insisted on helping with the move, on being there for this final goodbye. "You know," Dad said as we walked to our separate cars, "your mother would be proud of you, not just for stopping Vivian, but for staying true to yourself. The archaeology program, the photography." "I know," I said, thinking of Mom's letter. "She always was." As we drove away, I watched our house disappear in the rearview mirror. Place where I'd learned about loss and betrayal, but also about strength and truth. Where I'd learned that sometimes the most important discoveries aren't artifacts buried in the ground, but the stories buried in plain sight. Maya turned around from the front seat. "You okay?" I touched the camera hanging around my neck, Mom's old one, the one that had helped expose Vivian's truth. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." That evening, developing photos in Grandma's attic-turned darkroom, I found one last shot from that final confrontation with Vivian. The accidental flash had captured something remarkable, her mask slipping, revealing the desperation beneath. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous monsters are the ones who look most human. I pinned it to my wall alongside Mom's letter and my college acceptance. 3 pieces of a story that wasn't quite finished, because the best stories never really end, they just become part of who we are. Tomorrow I'd start packing for college. Tonight I had photos to develop, truth to uncover, and a mother's legacy to honor. After all, that's what archaeologists do. We piece together the past to understand our present and maybe, just maybe, to build a better future.